You're listening to Siris podcast. Join us as we transcend cultural barriers and elevate diverse voices. Here, we inspire, inform, and empower one story at a time. Let's dive in. Welcome to another episode of Siris Says. I actually am recording this once again with Tom. Thank you so much for letting me do this again.
Yeah, of course.
It's gonna happen at some point, but I raised the side angle from Tom, and we debated to see we'll just get it from the main one, but we were like, you know what? Let's just redo the whole thing. So here we are again.
Get a second shot at it.
Yeah, why not? So how are you doing, Tom? How are you feeling?
Good. Yeah, things are good. I can't complain. I'm
That's
excited
awesome.
to be on the podcast. Thank you for having me. So I've been looking forward to it. I'm excited to chat with you.
Yay, thank you. Appreciate it. So Tom, you've done an array of different things from product manager, which is what you do currently, to flying cards. And I want you to talk about that because it was something that popped out of your job career that popped up in what you show me about you. So why the flying cards?
My career's taken a lot of twists and turns, which we'll talk about, but I grew up here in the Bay Area, and the Bay Area I think is an interesting spot. Not like entrepreneurship is kind of in the air. I mean, if you grow up here, you're very close to Google and Apple, and that was very much a part of like our curriculum growing up in schools. And then my parents were all entrepreneurs as well, like my mom, my stepdad, my dad, and my grandpa. Like a lot of my family was kind of in business. So I grew up around like a lot of very entrepreneurial people. So from the time that I was a kid, I knew that I wanted to be an inventor. At least that's what I thought I wanted to be when I was a kid. So my very first invention was the flying car. Great idea. First grade, Crayola, busted out the prototypes on graph paper. And that's the story of the flying cars. It was my very first prototype, I guess you could say.
I love that. I've seen something recently of like a flying car, very slow, kind of more like a drone looking, style.
They must have gotten a hold of my drawings. That's the only explanation.
I think so. Yeah. You should be checking in.
Someone owes me a cut.
Yeah. All right, Tom. So just talk a little bit with the audience about your trajectory because it's been very complex, long, and awesome. I mean, you're very young, but you've accomplished quite a bit. So
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a fun ride, and I think it's kind of fun looking back on it because when you start your career, I think you think that it's going to follow this very linear trajectory, right? You're going to start in one place, and then it's going to be up and to the right, and like you have a very clear idea of what it's going to be like, and that is not how my career went. It was more like a jungle gym. It was like I did one thing here and then I switched to something else because I wasn't in love with what I was doing. There's a common thread in all of it, which is kind of like entrepreneurship. But yeah, I like started in marketing of all places at Google. And I did social media marketing at Google Glass for a year. That was my very first job. And I worked in social media marketing, kind of like talking to the people who had Google Glass, who like ran into issues with it, people who were upset about different things. So learned a lot about customer success and branding. And it was really interesting because it was a super polarizing product. Some people loved it and some people hated it. So it was really a good experience just to learn about, how you craft messaging and storytelling and interact with people who might not be super happy about different things. So it was a really solid first part of my career, I'd say.
That's awesome. Yeah. And so for marketing, what was the thing you loved the most out of all the things you did?
I loved interacting with people. Like I actually liked the customer success part. It was really fun to kind of like run into someone who had an issue, actually like genuinely be able to help them with something that they cared about. So I really liked that. There were a lot of hard parts about it too. Like, whenever I think you're on the front lines of like customer service and like talking to people, you're going to have some really good stories and some really bad ones, right?
Feedback,
so a lot of direct feedback. Yeah. So I learned about that and learned to have like kind of a thick skin. I think it was a really good starting point. I think the other part that I really liked about it is learning to write. I wrote a lot and during my internships. And I just learned that writing is crucial. You do it every single day.
Absolutely.
Like in emails or even Slack messages, or if you're writing like longer form things in blogs or journals, whatever. But it's a really important skill to have, and you get to do a lot of that in marketing.
Yeah, talking about like writing is so important. And then we're in the Bay Area, so like we have a lot of different cultures. And so how have you been able to, or even now in the current job that you do, because I'm interested to know, like, how do you try to mitigate, like, misunderstandings, right? Because sometimes there's, like, different cultures, think of, the way they communicate is different. So how do you try to mitigate that, Because that can be hard in the Bay Area, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's one of the coolest parts, and also, like you said, it can be challenging at times, too, because there's people from all over the world, right? So a lot of different types of perspectives and opinions, and I think it's what makes the Bay really, really strong, and a lot of great companies come out of here is the diverse opinions. And what I've learned to do is actually advice that I got from a book.
Sure.
One of the pieces of advice was like, be hard on the problem, easy on the people, right?
Mm.
So whatever happens, right, I really try and be gentle and empathetic with people and
Okay.
truly listen to them and figure out, what's happening, right?
Oh.
And then focus on the problem. And I think if everyone does that, it's usually like creates a very comfortable space for everyone to work together, and usually you end up finding the right solution. So for me, that's how I've done it.
I like that. That's a good point. And that's good to know. So then you transition into your next role, which was?
Yeah, so marketing was very close to sales. I was still kind of like talking to people, interacting with people, and I wanted to do more of that because that's what I like in the marketing gig. So that brought me to a company called Hotel Tonight, and I was doing kind of like general management at Hotel Tonight, but more sales and business development than anything. It's kind of funny at startups, you're given like a lot of responsibility, probably in more responsibility than you should have at 22, 23 years old. But it's a great way to learn a ton really, really quickly. So I worked with my boss. His name was Jeff. He's one of the best business people I've ever met in my entire life. And he had a career in entrepreneurship prior to working at Hotel Tonight. So he taught me a lot about operations and how to sell into hotels, which is what we were working with, and really just like the day-to-day of like what it looks like to work in a startup. So I loved it. I learned a ton. I learned to sell, which is incredibly difficult but incredibly important. I was not very good at it. I spent like my first 3 months making cold calls and getting shut down. Like, it was hard. It was hard making 50, 60 cold calls a day and not really getting any results from it. So I'll never forget like the first sale I had, little hotel in Savannah, Georgia, and I was just so excited after I was able to get them to sign with us. So it paid off in the end, and now I know like sales is just super important. Again, very similar to writing, you do a little bit of sales every single day. So I'm very thankful for that experience.
That's awesome. And your favorite part of that job, particularly?
Oh gosh, I think the people, at least in
people.
that role, it was a very special group of people. They hired a lot of really unique people of unique backgrounds and people who really, really cared about Hotel Tonight and traveling and wanted to build a great product. So it was very contagious, like the energy. I wanted to go to work every day and I wanted to work alongside them. But I think that was probably the best part. But again, like sales was really hard. It was difficult.
Especially in such a competitive industry.
Super competitive.
Very competitive in that industry.
Hotels is very competitive. There's just like a ton of people at the Goliath of the hotel space, like Expedia and Booking, that are selling into similar types of hotels. So it's very competitive, but it was great. And that kind of brought me into that's actually where I got my first taste of like product management and product building experience, or given the responsibility of like many different areas, like some of which you probably should have, some which you shouldn't. But one of the issues that we had was we had to track how many hotels were putting rooms on our platform. And it was super manual. Like we had to go and, basically just call them every single day, check how many rooms they had. And it wasn't like a very easy experience to navigate. So my buddy and I built a tool in a spreadsheet and rolled it out to the whole team, and like everyone loved it and it worked super well. It made the whole team more efficient. And that's when I really realized that like I love building products. I love creating things, and Excel kind of had its limitations.
Of course, I've been
there. So many things. You can only do so much there. So that's when I like really knew that I wanted to learn to code.
And data can be quite complex because not everybody enters it the same way. It's also like an art to like the process of entering the data itself, like it's also important.
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah. Data is super tricky. It's incredibly important, but also incredibly messy, right? Yeah, so the data was very, like I really enjoyed that, but I enjoyed like the actual, what it looked like to create something, right? So, but I knew I needed to learn to code. So that's what, kind of gave me the itch to learn to code. And I started teaching myself on nights and weekends, and did that for almost like a year and a half until I decided, I wanted to do it full time. And I left Hotel Tonight to a coding boot camp in Barcelona. And that kind of was probably one of the bigger decisions that I made, because I was really switching from business into the tech side of things, which is a pretty big jump. And I didn't have a background in coding or anything. So, but very glad I did it, because it definitely brought me to where I am today.
Do you like coding originally? I don't like it because it's like a different language and it's super like specific, right? And it's like if you mess something, the whole thing does not work. So it's very detail driven, so to speak.
Sure,
So how do you wrap your head around like learning that you liked it, or was it easy, or you were just like, I just gotta get through this type of
Yeah,
thing?
yeah. No, it's a great question. It is like very specific. And I think like my relationship with it evolved over time. When you're first starting out, I thought it was really fun because I could like actually build things and create
Yeah.
like my ideas. I always, I had these ideas like the flying cars and I like was never able to create them.
Right.
So it was cool to actually have like a line of sight, like to be able to figure out like, okay, like I don't exactly know how to do this, but I can see how it probably was built,
Mm.
right? So I liked that part of it. But there's kind of another world. Like after I did the coding boot camp, I went into software engineering, actually back at Hotel Tonight. So they hired me back as a boomerang. And I was like
Mm.
a true through and through software engineer. So I was working on the product. And I went from being pretty experienced in business development and sales, like
Mhm.
starting from square one in
Yeah.
coding. And it was really hard because I really couldn't contribute that much out of the box. And it's sort of like what you were saying about coding is it was super challenging because once you get into a company,
Mm.
there's not like a lot of like documentation a lot of times. So you have to like learn the code base
Mm.
without all of the resources of the internet as much.
Is it still to this day like that in
Yeah, I
software
think
engineering?
I would say
That's
it
rough.
depends like who you, but
Mm.
I would say more often than not, like documentation is not usually readily available. So you have to kind of like read a lot of
Mm.
code and figure out how it works. And, it takes you a while before you can actually write code. So you're not like, I
Mm.
wasn't building things as quickly.
Yeah.
It was a lot of like solving bugs and building small features. And
Mm.
that for me, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed doing it. I liked the actual experience of it, but I don't think it was like a forever job for me.
Mm.
Just because like I said, I really like wanted to be able to build things and sink my teeth into problems and talk to people. And
Mm.
I wasn't able to do quite as much of that, like on the
Yeah.
software side.
I could see that. Software engineer is more like you're more of an individual contributor in a
Hmm.
way, and then yeah, you're just delivering, and getting feedback, but it's not very dynamic, I'd say.
I think it depends. It depends a lot
Yeah.
on the company, a lot on the
Uh-huh.
team. I still think it's incredibly important to be able to communicate. And like the people who are good communicators
Mm.
are definitely have a leg up in the space
Mm.
because so much of what you're doing is like talking to designers, you're talking to engineers, you're trying
Right.
to figure out what the problem is. But I think depending on where you are, at least where I was, you have less of a say in the solution. You're more like a
Mm.
part of
That's
like
what I was gonna say.
creating the
Yeah.
solution,
A
right? So
little bit.
usually the product managers and the designers are the ones who are like talking to customers and surfacing the
Yeah.
problems and be like, hey, I think we should build X, Y, and Z. And of course you contribute to that process. But at least where I was, like I wasn't doing as much of it as I would have liked.
Mm.
So yeah.
Mm. I see. And so that made you transition into the next thing, which was
Entrepreneurship. So,
entrepreneurship. Yeah.
like I said, my career's kind of been like a jungle gym. I've like
Yeah.
jumped to a lot of different areas, but the common thread was really I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I grew up with like all of my family members who were in entrepreneurship. And, the piece of advice that they gave me when I was a kid was like, learn as many of the parts of business as you can, right? So that
Mm.
you can do it on your own one day. So I felt like I'd done that, right? Like I'd
Mm.
learned marketing, I'd learned sales, I'd learned some software engineering, and I could kind of, finally create the things that I wanted to build. So I met my co-founder and we came up with an idea to connect homeowners and property management companies. Homeowners being like people typically who have second homes that buy a
Yeah.
home in Napa.
Great idea, by the way.
I still think it's a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a hard space to make work just
I
because of
mean,
the
I think
business.
what
But
Airbnb that did that essentially.
yeah, I think they
But more for like obviously renting. Yeah,
exactly. So we would be like
like
helping
short-term
people
renting. Yeah.
who are on Airbnb. So like if you had a house,
Mm.
that you wanted to rent out, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that go into that.
Yeah.
You need to get the reservations, you need to explain where all the
Yeah.
things are in the house, you need to change the toilet paper and
Yeah.
every time someone leaves.
Yeah.
So you can hire a property manager to do that. And it's hard to find a good property manager. And they charge a lot. It's like
Mm.
20 to 30%. So that was where we came
Mm.
in was we were like filtering out of the property management companies and trying to find good ones and connect them with homeowners. But
Mm.
like I said, I still think it was a good idea. We got into Y Combinator, which is like a startup accelerator. So they kind of mentor you and coach you and bring you up to speed on like how to build the business. And we did it for probably 6 months until we realized that it just wasn't a big enough market for like a venture backed company. And then we ended up pivoting into a different idea. But yeah, I mean, I had finally kind of like lived my entrepreneurship
Yeah.
experience. Like I'd finally gotten there, which was
No,
great.
everybody does. Like you have to be brave to do it. So the fact that you did it, it means a lot, you know?
Yeah, well, thank you. It was very hard. It was very rewarding. I enjoyed it a lot. And I think, that's sort of like, I think the other, I guess, thread in my career in terms of like
Yeah.
there's the entrepreneurship, but there's also kind of trying to find something that I thought was going to make me happy, right? So,
You were looking for that the whole time.
I was looking for that the whole time. Yeah. So like when I switched from marketing to sales to engineering to entrepreneurship, I kind of always thought it was going to be entrepreneurship. And, I'd worked so hard to get to this point to become an entrepreneur. And to be honest, it was not quite what I expected it was going to be. It was really hard on your mental health. It was really hard on your just like body. You were working a lot of hours and it's incredibly stressful. And, I think that life is for some people, but I just realized for me, I didn't want to sacrifice a part of myself for that.
Oh, for sure. There's a level of sacrifice you have to do. And
yeah,
it's
really
a lot
is.
of hours. So people, I mean, if you're really passionate about it, they don't even care too much about the profit, but you have to be super passionate about it.
I think that's the key. Yeah. I think if you're building like at least a venture-backed company, like a company that, raises a lot of money, you have to really love what it is that you're doing.
Right. And you talked about this on the first time we recorded, actually. You were talking about like responding to stakeholders.
Yeah.
Extremely tough thing. But I wanted you to share with the audience, like, what is it about that is so tough?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. And I think there's a distinction between the different types of companies that you can build, like in the tech space. So there's, what is called a venture-backed company, and then there's a bootstrapped company. Bootstrapped meaning like you don't raise outside funding. You just put your own money into the pot and you try and make the business work. Venture being you raise money from outside investors, right? So like going through Y Combinator, like we raised a little bit of money from them, and then we raised, a seed round. And the idea is that you raise a bunch of money and then you grow really, really quickly, right? And you unlock what they're called like fundraising rounds. So you unlock your seed and then you unlock your Series A and your Series B, you keep raising more money. And as you do that, you kind of end up getting more stakeholders, right? Because more people are investing in your business. So one of the things that I thought I was going to like about entrepreneurship was like being my own boss and like kind of being in control of my own destiny. And I think you have some of that, like you are in control of your own destiny, but you also have a lot of people who are watching you and have a stake in the game, and it's a lot of stress, right? So, I think for me, that was something I didn't really know until I got into it.
Was it demanding in the sense of like, did you have to do weekly meetings, sort of like updating them and everything you have done, or was it bi-weekly, monthly meetings? Like, what was the demand on it? Because I know everybody's different.
Everyone's different. Everyone manages a little bit different. We were lucky. We had amazing investors. Everyone who invested in the business was incredible and like very helpful. It was more just like the deep sense of like, man, you really want to make this work for them, right? Because it's not your money at that point. A lot of it isn't, right? So it's like you're doing it for yourself, but you're also like, you're doing it for them too, right? So for me, that was really hard because I didn't want to let them down.
Like a responsibility.
Yeah. And so it was less about people looking over your shoulder, trying to figure out what you're doing. It was more about like, you go from wanting to make one person happy who might be your boss, right? To like dozens and dozens potentially, depending on how you grow, even more if you're successful. So yeah, I think that part was a little bit tricky.
I see. And that totally makes sense. I mean, a lot of people, especially when say, I want to be a manager, but a manager means you have to take care of everybody else underneath you.
Yeah.
And that's like basically eliminating roadblocks for them, which a lot of people are actually not very good at it because they rather just like, I don't want to worry about your headaches, but that's literally management. Like you have to remove roadblocks for other people. So
yeah, and I think
if you want to be a good boss.
If you want to be a good boss,
yeah.
And that was when I was at Hotel Tonight. I didn't talk about this part, but I was in sales and I got promoted to being a manager. I did it for about a year. Also learned a ton, and I kind of like did exactly what you said, right? I was like, okay, if I want to grow, I got to become a manager, and then I'm going to grow into the next position, right? I think there was a piece of advice that someone gave me, and I'm trying to remember exactly what it was. It was look at your boss's job. Like if you keep going, right, where are you trying to climb to? And someone gave me that advice around the same time that eventually, right around when I was learning to code. And I looked at that job and I'm like, do I really want that job? And I didn't want that job, because of a lot of the reasons. It's like very high stress and just a lot of hours, and it's a lot of pressure, and just like the work that I would have been doing, I wasn't super excited about. So I think I always tell people, what's actually going to make you happy in your career? What do you like doing? How can you do more of that, right?
That's fair.
Look at your boss's job. Do you want that job? Because if you're not careful, you might get it, right? You might climb up there and then you realize you don't like it, right?
Yeah.
So
it's good, and I think it's having that mentality is great. Having forward mentality, like, okay, what do I envision myself being? Especially when we're young, we have this like idea of what something is, but I think it's just better to like research,
Yeah.
look at people, ask them, hey,
Oh,
how do you feel
totally.
in that role? Because they may look like they're great, right, in the
Yeah.
outside, but then in the inside, they're like dying slowly, you know? They're like, or very unhappy or just not fulfilled.
Yeah. I think that's great advice. It's just like, talk to people, right? And see if
Mm.
they like it. And I think you also kind of have to ask the right questions when you're talking to them as well
That's
and
true.
try and build a relationship. It's kind of a vulnerable thing to admit, like, oh, I'm not happy in my job, right? Or
Right,
I'm not
especially when
happy
you're
with what
like a
I'm doing.
high-end director and
Yeah.
you're like making tons of money, and then you're
Yeah.
like, ah.
Yeah. And I think you kind of talk yourself into it, right? You're like, oh, yeah, this is great. But
Yeah.
so I think it's good to ask. And I think, it's good to kind of work your way into that too and just, try and build a relationship with, see what they have to say. Because I do think that that's really helpful is just getting advice from people and seeing what they like to do and being introspective and figuring out what you actually like to do, what you are willing to sacrifice to have the job. Because there's no matter what you do, there's a cost to it, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
You can keep climbing, you can have more responsibility, more power, more money, but you have to sell
Yeah.
something, right? It's maybe your
Yeah.
free time or time with your family or your health. And I think that's
Yeah.
something that we don't talk really
Enough,
enough
yeah.
about is the
Yeah.
cost of a lot of those things.
Yeah. It's true. All right, we'll take a short break and we'll be right back. Thank you. Today's episode is sponsored by RenovateMagicHub.com, your guide to transforming your home. Whether you're updating a room or planning a full makeover, Renovate Magic Hub provides tailored product suggestions to suit your style and budget. Visit RenovateMagicHub.com for inspiring and practical tips to create a space you'll love. All right, guys, we're back from sponsor. So, Tom, now we're going to talk about your most recent role, which is
Yeah.
product management. And how does everything else that you've done so far tie into that?
Yeah.
Because that's how you ultimately got to your dream job, essentially. So.
Yeah, it is. And I feel like I finally reached like the final rung of the jungle gym and I had to go, jump around to a lot of different areas. But what that gave me was a lot of different experiences in a lot of different areas, right? So, like I said, at this point, I'd done marketing, sales, like we talked about, entrepreneurship, software engineering. And
Yes.
the part of working in a startup company that I liked the most was really like the product management part of it. So like talking to customers, figuring out what their problems were, and then trying to come up with solutions to build them, working with designers to build them. And that's really what I do every day. I talk to customers, I look at their problems, and then I try and figure out what we need to build, and then I work with our designers and engineers to actually build them. And for me, it's perfect. I get to wear a lot of different hats, and I think it lets me kind of be free in a way to like do a little bit of everything. And that's like what makes me the most happy. So I've really been enjoying it. I've been doing it for about 3 years now. And I love the company I'm working for. I love my boss. And just like the field in general, I think really fits my skill set. So I've been really happy doing it. And it wasn't a straight line. And I think for a lot of people, it's not a straight line.
It's really not like those of you that are younger, like you think, oh, I'm gonna do this. Like I'd say, don't get so hung up on like one thing, because life, like, it will throw you different ways. Like it will take you different journeys, and I think everything has a purpose. It'll teach you something, and then you can utilize that into the next role, and then like it all kind of makes sense eventually once you get to your ultimate destination, which you did.
Totally agree. I couldn't agree more. I think, when you look back, it all kind of makes sense, but looking forward, as you're in the moment, it might not feel like you're doing the right
A little
thing.
frustrating,
But
I guess, a little.
yeah, you just feel like, okay, like maybe I don't like this or I'm not on the path I want to be on. And I think there's sort of two things there that I think are important. One is as long as you're learning something and you're growing, you're probably on the right path. You're probably doing okay, right? And then I think you got to be really honest with yourself. Like, what do you like? What don't you like? What are you good at? And it's never too late to like change and do something else. Like I think like I probably am like the most atypical like software engineer. Like I didn't come from like a STEM background. Like I was an English and history guy, and I switched into it. Right. I was like giving people that advice too. I was like, hey, if you want to like learn to code, you want to do something that seems really hard, you can do it. Right. It's not impossible. You just kind of have to work at it. And I think more than anything, like dive in, actually try. I think a lot of people give up before they get started. You don't have to, you can just know that like you'll figure it out, believe that you'll figure it out. At least for me, like that was a really powerful thing.
I like that idea. Let go of the fear because you can't control the outcome essentially. I think a lot of the things we do when we're younger is like we're trying to be perfect or like
Yeah,
obtain a lot of money and success and fame maybe, right? Or
yeah,
recognition. And it's like that's not the most important thing.
yeah,
But we realize that way later than our path of our career, right? Where we realize, oh
totally.
my God, time is
Yeah.
literally what's limited, and that you want to make sure you have enough time for what you love and
Hmm.
people that you care about and things like that. So,
I think so, and I think that that's another piece of advice. I think I heard it, but I think like you sort of have to go through the process before you believe it, you know?
yeah,
Like when I was in my early 20s, I was like success is one thing. It's like starting a company,
yeah,
it's like building a massive company and having a huge impact in all these areas. And I still think like that is success for some people. People really want to build towards that. And the question I didn't ask myself, which I finally have learned to ask myself, is like what's actually going to make me happy, right?
hmm,
Is it flexibility? Is it more money? Is it more power? Is it time with my family? Is it my health? And, for me, that's changed a lot over the years from being, I want to be as successful as I possibly can to, I still want to be successful. That still drives me, right? I
right,
love working hard. I love working on what I'm doing, but I also want to have time to be with my wife and hang out with my cat and like,
yeah.
work on hobbies outside of work and take care of my health, right? Because like I said, you have to sell something. If you want to be that successful, you do have to sell something. And like oftentimes, at least for me when I was doing it, that was my health and it was time with my
Mm.
family and my loved ones.
So switching gears
Yeah.
into culture, and you're from the Bay Area, but does your family are from here, or do they have backgrounds anywhere else in the
Yeah,
world?
yeah. So I grew up in a divorced family. My parents got divorced when I was 4 years old. So it's all I've ever known. I kind of look at it not like I had divorced parents, I just had more parents. I had a stepdad
Yeah.
and a stepmom, and they were all wonderful influences. And my stepdad is actually from Switzerland. So he moved here when he was 28, I want to say. So he's been here
Hmm.
actually in California longer than he was in Switzerland. But European culture was kind of a part of my life and
Yeah.
Swiss culture. And growing up around him, and it's really like played a part in who I am today, just in terms of my values and how I see the world, and I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah. Something particular that stands out that you learned from Swiss culture.
So my stepdad, he's an engineer and he's Swiss, so I think there's probably some carryover like
Okay.
between both of those things, but he's very methodical, he's
Hmm.
very precise, and he just like I think this might be a Swiss thing is or part of Swiss culture is things don't go to waste, right? Everything has a use,
Hmm.
and you should really think deeply about
Hmm.
what it is that you're doing. You're building something, or if you're making dinner, like how much do you actually need? What do you need to use in
Hmm.
order to not have waste? And I think like for me that was a really amazing thing to grow up around because I learned just about like resourcing and environmental impact, and it's become a really important part of my life.
Hmm. So when you buy something per se, are you thinking of like, okay, how can I maximize this? Does it go through
It,
your brain because it's part of how you grew up?
I think so. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
well, it sort of depends on what you're buying, but
yeah.
like, if I'm building a project, it's very much like a measure twice, cut once kind of
Okay,
situation, and
I see.
make sure the plans are right
Okay.
before I do that. So I think I learned that from him. And the Swiss also have, I mean, at least my stepdad has a pretty deep connection with like nature, and they grew up very close to the Alps and grew up like hiking and going into the mountains. And when
Mm,
we went there a lot as kids, like that was a big part of what we were doing. So being outside, and I think that's one of the reasons I love California. Is like just
yeah,
being in nature is really
best
it for
weather.
me. Yeah, oh yeah, best weather. But
Yeah.
yeah, and then I think the last thing is he's just a very kind person
Mm,
and very compassionate, very
mm,
empathetic, and I think part of that is like from Swiss culture for sure. A lot of it
yeah,
is just who he is.
yeah.
But I think I learned a lot from him just about different ways of like showing that you care, right?
Mm,
And I think that that was another part of it growing up that I really appreciated.
that's great. I love that. Okay, thank you for sharing that. So we have a fun thing in my podcast where I ask you the question of the last guest, and then you
Yeah,
leave one for the next one. So the last guest left the following question, which was, what would you do for humanity to make it 1% better, per se?
yeah, that's a great question. I've thought a lot about this over the years because I think, like I said, when I was a kid, I had one idea for what I thought success was. And I think
Hmm.
it's like, oh, I need to have the biggest impact on the most people possible. And I still think that's an important thing and you should strive to do that. But really, where I try and make the world a better place is like in my immediate nucleus of people and my immediate family. And I really try and be be there for them, my wife, my brother, my family, all my friends. If anyone ever needs anything, I really try and help them. And I think like that's, I mean, at least my small way of trying to give back and make the world a better place. It's not, you know, on the scale of, I think, that I expected or wanted when I was younger. But I also think like if everyone did that, it would probably be, the world would be a little bit better.
Right? I think so. I agree. Honestly, making an impact in your closest friends and family, I think that's the most important. Like taking care of your people, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Like taking care of your people, that's really important to me. And
I love that answer.
Yeah, just being there to support.
Love that. So what will be your question for the next guest?
Yeah, so my question is, what is something that is a part of your identity, that you identify as a part of yourself, and it can't be work? And the reason for that is, you know, you've probably seen some general themes throughout the podcast, but it's something I've had to discover along the way. And the way that I discovered what I care about and who I am as a person is by actually going through the process of like being really tied up in work and having that become a huge part, really the biggest part of my identity, and then leaving that and really not knowing who I was, right? And that was really hard. I kind of had to start over, and I kind of had to really figure that out and really think about it and really spend time, again, introspecting on it. I'm coining that term today if it's not a word. And yes, I'm always curious, like, what is a part of yourself that's not work that you're proud of, that's a part of your identity?
Do you think, this is like a fun side question, but do you think, because men and women are a little bit different in that sense, and I know men, like, they tend to like focus on their career for long periods of time. So do you think getting to find out who you are, your identity outside of work, did that help you also ultimately find your significant other?
Oh yeah, for sure.
For sure, right?
I always tell people this, and I think it's probably a cliche thing to say, but I truly think you have to understand who you are before you can find out who you should be with, right? Or find someone who's going to make you happy, right?
And that's outside of work.
I mean, for some people, I imagine it's like if you're really, you know, into work and you want to find someone, if that's your thing, right?
That's true.
Like, that's okay. But I think you have to like be sure about that, right? I think that's always the dating advice that I give is understand who you are, spend time figuring yourself out before you go trying to find a companion, because it's really hard to do that. And, you know, that was something that it took me many years, but I'm very glad I did. I'm very glad I waited, because I ended up with my wife today, who's wonderful, and I'm incredibly happy.
That's awesome. Well, I love the question. I'll definitely ask that to the next guest. And so where can people find you, Tom?
Yeah, linkedin.com/Tom Patton 2, I believe.
I will link it. Don't worry. Yeah, I'll put it in the description. But that's great. So anybody can reach out to you.
Please do.
If they have questions regarding all those different roles that you've done. And
questions about roles that I've done, switching careers. If you just want to chat, you know, like talk through like things that you're thinking in your life or career, I'm happy to do that too. So really, like anything and everything, please reach out.
When you're trying to set up the business, you were trying to raise money and all of that. So anybody who's starting that, can they come to you?
100%. Entrepreneurship.
Because that's tough to find people, you know, that can give you good consulting for it.
Yeah, you know, I'll do my best. But yeah, I'm absolutely happy to give you my take on it, my 2 cents, and be helpful how I can. So again, entrepreneurship, coding, sales, like career switching, anything and everything. Happy to chat.
I love that. Well, thank you so much, Tom. It's been a pleasure having you. Appreciate you.
It.
Hope you guys enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and go check out Tom's LinkedIn and reach out and say hi and say, hey, I saw you on Siris Says. So thank you.
Appreciate it.
All right. Bye. Thanks for listening to Siris Says. Don't forget to follow, subscribe, and drop a like. Share your thoughts in the comments and stay tuned for more inspiring stories. Until next time, keep chasing those dreams.